This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
At that time, we were coming off of 3 championships. I fulfilled my responsibility to the city, to the Bulls, to my teammates. When I told Phil, I said, look, I'm about here. I'm about done. I have no more challenges. I have no motivation. I was done.
Well, we're on to episode number 7. We only have one more Sunday left after last night. It's the Last Dance recap. This is Distant Replay Podcast. I am Ben George. He is Mike Noto. Tonight we're going through episode 7. Going to recap everything we saw in this episode. I thought it was pretty good, but there was a lot of stuff in there. But we're talking a lot of baseball, the transition from basketball to baseball, that kind of first retirement, his dad's death, some of the conspiracy theories in the post-Jordan Bulls. Loved watching how that developed again after Jordan walked away from the game. So a lot going on. We're talking the first round of the playoffs, plus also 95, 96, that time frame. So a lot to get into tonight. Remember, you can check us out online, distantreplaypodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at Distant Podcast. Hit subscribe wherever you listen. Also YouTube. Every episode we do is up on YouTube as well. So Mike, jumping in episode 7, man, and I love the way this one started. It couldn't have started any better with the clip from Craig Sager asking Jerry Krause, and he starts it off at a press conference by talking about backstabbing. Hey, all the backstabbing that's been going on in the last couple of months. Are you surprised things are still going pretty well? I loved it the way he asked the question. Jerry Krause walks off, and you have the one reporter that was there to actually get some work done. Oh, way to go, Craig.
And the best thing is how matter-of-fact Sager was when he asked the question and how heated Jerry Krause got. You could tell he didn't really hide how heated he was. I mean, he walked off. But no one misses a chance to bag on this guy. No one misses a chance to get a dig in at Jerry Krause. And if anything, Jerry Krause was actually too upfront about everything in his plans. I don't think he was backstabbing anyone. I think he was pretty out front and very upfront with everyone involved regarding his plans for the Bulls and the future.
Yeah, probably so. I mean, you could probably make that argument as well, but you don't hear many questions like that. I mean, it just kind of shows you what kind of relationship you have with everybody, because I'd be hard pressed to find somebody like Craig Sager asking really anybody that right now, but just kind of gave you a really good picture of where we were in that moment. So we start off with 98.
But hey, Ben, picture a GM these days. I thought about this when you just said that. Picture a GM in this day and age that had won 5 championships and built a team that won 5 championships, and picture them getting treated like he gets treated. You'd never see it. People would die to get an interview with that GM.
Yeah, well, not in this situation. So it was a very unique position that they were in, and a really good way to kick off the show. So we are 98 playoffs. They're underway. That's where we are current time frame in terms of the Last Dance. Nets were the first up. We get a couple games, and we're going to circle back to this because we get back into the 98 team again a little bit, and we started getting a little taste of Jordan with his teammates. But let's go back to summer 93 because that's where we go back to. And Jordan just wins a championship. He's exhausted. All the gambling stuff's happening. And, he talked about on the show, because we know that he ended up leaving and going to play baseball. But, depending on who you ask, it seemed like it was kind of, I won't say well-known, but I would imagine his close circle of friends had to have a pretty good idea that, that wasn't a big surprise when he made that decision, because he talked about it. And then you had somebody else mention, a year ago, he said, I'm going to shock the world and go play baseball. So it may have been more premeditated than I ever thought.
Yeah, because Jordan himself mentioned in this episode that he had talked to his father after the 93 season about potentially going to play baseball, which I never knew. And you had a lot of people that were close to him in this episode that we haven't really seen in the documentary up till now. And one of them that I made a note about was George Kohler, who his byline here in the documentary says he's Jordan's personal assistant and his best friend. And I thought he gave some very interesting insight to not only Jordan's plans to play baseball, but his relationship with his father. which, they said several times was more like a best friend relationship than a father-son relationship.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that. And that's part of what made that transition maybe become expedited, because we know that summer, Jordan's dad was found, or his car was found first. It had been rummaged through and dumped somewhere, and they ended up finding his body a little time later. And I'd kind of forgotten how that timeline went, because I was 12 years old at the time, and I remembered it. And I was a huge Jordan fan. Obviously, we all were. Anybody who lived during that era really admired what he was able to do. And I remember the story kind of happening, and being that young, I didn't pay that close attention to it and didn't understand death all that well. But kind of watching how that unfolded was kind of a little bit surprising to me that it lasted as long as it did. I don't remember it being this huge issue for a long time. I kind of thought it really happened. They found his body, and that was kind of it. But this was such a tragic story. But the worst part was that after this, all the speculation became, well, did Jordan and his gambling problem in quotes, competition problems, he would say, did that have something to do with it? And the first thing I thought was, I can't imagine what it would have been like now if that would have been the case. And all the social media conspiracy theories, and we already live in the middle of this conspiracy theory world now, Mike. I mean, you know that, but if this was the case then, I can't imagine what would have come out or what else would have been written. I mean, it was a handful of stories that were written, but I can't imagine how much worse it would have been.
Yeah, you put it perfectly regarding the story around his father's death. I'll be completely honest with you. I thought that they found him in the car dead. So I was way off. And I didn't realize that it was, it was basically 3 weeks in between when they found his car and when they found him. I had told, like you said, we were around the same age, 11, 12 years old. And I just don't remember any of those details. And the media coverage of this in the aftermath, it's one of those things where just totally baseless claims. It's not like there was even any evidence or any indication that these two guys who shot and killed his father were involved or tied to his gambling at all. There was no connection, whatsoever. Just goes to show, I think it was more maybe it was journalists with an axe to grind against Jordan, people who didn't like Jordan, trying to capitalize on something not so good happening in his life. I don't know. It's just very strange to me that they picked that to sort of focus in on and make a big deal out of.
Yeah, it was all kind of new to me, but really tragic to kind of see how that all played out, and their family getting all back together back in North Carolina and going through that process. But I just can't imagine how that 3 or 4 weeks went. I mean, it was just, to me, it all, like you said, I thought it all happened. Like, they discovered him in the car. That was it. He was found dead, and that was kind of it. Like, he was attacked in the car. But this was all kind of new. So that was interesting to me, but it really led into him making this decision and moving away from basketball. And I thought, honestly, that played more of a part in it when I remembered it too. That was the other memory I had, Mike, too, was that I thought kind of he walked away because of his dad. Like, I thought that played more into it, as in terms of, he just couldn't deal with that pressure and didn't want to, he played so long with his dad around and he was so close with him that once that happened, he just couldn't stand to play any longer. But it just seems like that was a very small piece, and maybe it just kind of helped push him over the edge a little bit quicker because of that.
We've talked up to this point in this documentary and in this podcast that we've been doing here, all the different episodes, about Jordan's climb to get to the top of the basketball world, right? And I just think when you go through all the stuff he went through early in his career, getting over the Pistons, winning the 3 championships in a row, playing in the Barcelona Olympics, I just think after the finals with the Suns, culminating with, the unfortunate death of his father, I just think he was exhausted and drained. And he was looking for something that may take his mind off what he was going through. And I think that's what he found in baseball. And one thing that I had no recollection of, it's a common theme here, me having no recollection, by the way, but I didn't realize how his retirement from basketball was leaked when he was at the White Sox game. I had no recollection of that whatsoever.
Yeah, that's the other part of it. And I'll ask one more thought on Jordan's dad. Then I thought this would have been a bigger story if it happened now to, another top player, the top player in any sport, number one player in any sport. I just feel like it would have been a bigger deal. I don't remember it being this is the greatest athlete in the world, and his dad is missing. And he's been missing for 3 weeks. Where is he? What's going on? I don't remember that nightly coverage of it. I just remember it as just kind of a one-time event. So that was all it's just weird thinking back on it now because it just didn't add up to what I remembered at all. But you talk about that announcement, and yeah, I had no clue either. I remember the press conference a little bit and making that announcement, but that was amazing that leaked out while he was at the game during that White Sox game, and they make that announcement there during the show. I don't remember how that even happened. I'm curious how that even leaked out. It was Pat O'Brien that broke the news, right?
Yeah, he broke it. He broke it like in the he was like the not the sideline reporter, but the reporter that they have on the third baseline there. And yeah, he broke it in the middle of the game. And I don't know if I was more surprised that I didn't remember how it went down or that the White Sox were in the ALCS.
Yeah, exactly. That was part of it too. He threw out the first pitch, and that announcement was obviously a big deal, right? I mean, to see the best player in the world walk out, and that brings up another set of conspiracy theories that were swirling around at that time, and I guess one that's kind of still gone on to this day, and Jordan finally went on record, and so did David Stern, which, now that he's passed, pretty incredible we were able to get him on to talk about some of this stuff, to be a part of the documentary. But the other conspiracy was that Jordan was suspended for 18 months from the NBA because of his gambling problem. Another ludicrous conspiracy that Stern and Jordan both shot down. And again, another conspiracy that I had not heard until recently.
Yeah, that's always been out there with his gambling, that, there was some kind of suspension coming Jordan's way, and as a way to not have to deal with that, him and Stern kind of had a meeting, and they said, if you can come up with some other solution other than playing and kind of go away, we won't suspend you. Again, there's you would have to, for that to take place, you would have to have Jordan and Stern have that conversation, and for it never to leak for all this time. Not one person, coming forward and said, hey, Jordan didn't really retire. This is what really happened. If that was the case, it would have leaked by now. You would know the true story by now. That's people being involved with something, keeping quiet for a very long time if it were to be true. Obviously, it's not based in any kind of fact whatsoever. It's kind of like the theories on why his father was killed. And hey, that press conference, when he announced his retirement, how stunned did everyone look in that room?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
They all knew it was coming, and they all looked stunned.
Yeah, the press conference itself, all the number of media that were in attendance, it was all quite the spectacle. And I give Reinsdorf a lot of credit. I mean, he did a good job with the announcement, really kind of thanking Jordan for what he did, and seemed to be pretty honest and straightforward. I mean, very authentic, it seemed, with what he was saying. I mean, any other time I would imagine he'd be pretty bitter. But as Jordan said, he had kind of did what he had promised the city, right? He'd won 3 championships. I mean, how could you be angry with his decision? Plus, that all was coming at the time with his father's death. I mean, as much as it was unsuspected, you could not fault the guy for doing that.
Yeah, 2 things with Reinsdorf, or with that press conference. With Reinsdorf, he paid him his basketball salary to play minor league baseball, which I never knew until Reinsdorf said it in this episode here. And also in the press conference, Jordan did leave the door open to a return.
Yeah.
So he didn't completely shut the door on basketball. And I go back to what I said before. I just think with everything going on, he needed something to kind of ease his mind and get his mind off of things for a little while. And I think baseball provided that perfect outlet for him.
Yeah, and as he said before, I mean, he needs motivation a lot of times in order to get up and to perform at the level he does. And he had lost that motivation, and that was part of the reason why he stepped away. But yeah, I also made a note of that Reinsdorf comment on the basketball contract, and he said, look, the guy was underpaid for what he was doing for the city and organization, so I decided to keep paying him, which, good for him. I don't know if, how I would assume it's true, but it's kind of interesting that he dropped that in there. Like, give me a little more credit. I'm not like Krause. I appreciate what this guy was doing for our franchise the whole time. But let's move into the Birmingham Barons, Mike. This is my wheelhouse, pal.
Oh, yeah.
I was in Birmingham during the Jordan era. I was out at the Hoover Metropolitan Stadium, which you saw a number of times in those highlights. Those wall signs in the outfield brought me back to my youth, pal. A lot of the companies that are no longer around anymore that I saw up there on the wall. I actually went to one Jordan game. Went to one Jordan game at the Barons. I mean, it was impossible to get a ticket. I mean, it was sold out every night. They have one of those, every minor league field has one of these, grass fields where the kids play. Left field line, outfield, that grass kind of just probably about the size of the stands all the way up, and just everybody sitting out there lined up trying to get a foul ball, but also trying to get a look at Jordan. It was a pretty cool experience. And I'm surprised one thing out of this, that that they never really talked about, and I thought they might. I think they've mentioned it. I think they had the 30 for 30 on it. Jordan Rides the Bus, 30 for 30, where he actually bought a $350,000 cruiser for the team so that they could actually ride in style. I think it had like a VCR and like 3 or 4 TVs in it and a little suite in the back that he actually gave to the team afterwards. So, I guess going from what he was doing to that, he had to like at least jazz it up a little bit. Nobody likes that minor league travel. But Jordan played pretty well. I mean, got off to a good start until the pitchers actually started attacking him and not just throwing him fastballs every time. But his career was pretty good. I mean, for what we've seen, and everybody kind of gives him grief, but to step off a basketball court at that age, not having played baseball for a while, the dude was an athlete, and he competed at a pretty good level for where he was.
Yeah, so I'll give you my quick hits from the Jordan baseball experiment, things I was not aware of before this documentary. I always wondered why he played Double-A. Why would he just go right to Double-A?
Yeah.
And they actually said in this documentary it's because the press facilities at the Single-A and rookie ball level weren't big enough for the amount of media that was going to cover the game. So that's one thing. Second, I didn't realize that Terry Francona was his manager.
Oh, yeah. How great is that?
I didn't realize that. I mean, Francona, nothing needs to really be said about how great of a manager he turned out to be. And lastly, I didn't realize he had a 13-game hitting streak to start his minor league career. I don't remember that being a story at all.
Yeah.
Something tells me if LeBron James went to play baseball right now and he had a 13-game hitting streak for a Double-A team and, the Toledo Mud Hens or whatever, that we would hear about it. I don't ever remember hearing that.
Yeah, I kind of remember like him being pretty good to start his career and then struggling quite a bit. And the Double-A, look, the Southern League is what the Barons play in. Southern League's really good. Most players that are any good will jump straight from that league to the majors. They'll skip over AAA altogether. So you got a lot of really good players that are young that leave there 22, 23 and go straight into the pros. So you're talking about a pretty competitive league as it is. So that was, something to be said for that. But again, it goes back to the media coverage of him and his performance. And maybe it's because, as we find out in these 2 episodes, this one and the next one we'll get into on our next episode, that, a lot of people didn't like Jordan because of the way he was as a person and his personality. But again, you see this again with the media coming after Jordan because of his performance and really just being overly critical. And I get it, like he wasn't playing well, but you're not going to give anybody else that kind of coverage negatively that they gave Jordan.
Yeah, so the famous cover of him missing a ball by about 10 miles on the front cover of the Sports Illustrated saying, bag it, Michael. And from that point on, he didn't speak to Sports Illustrated. And Jordan had a good relationship with a lot of pretty well known Sports Illustrated writers. I mean, Jack McCallum was with Sports Illustrated at that time. You had Jackie McMullen was with Sports Illustrated at that time, I believe, or shortly there, or I think right around this time. And he never spoke to that magazine again. And, look, he's another example of he gave the Sports Illustrated how many headlines over the years, how many covers over the years, how many interviews over the years. And the first time they get a chance to turn their back on the guy, they do it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. When you put it like that, it really just makes you scratch your head. Like why would that be? And I get you want to sell magazines and whatnot, but I mean, what do you expect the guy to do? And it's not like, I mean, he was still entertaining, right? He was a great teammate from all accounts in baseball. Got along with those guys really well, doing things kind of the right way. I mean, sure, maybe because he jumped right into Double-A, so people were probably upset. Like, baseball is very traditionalist sport, right? Like, you got to follow the unwritten rules. And maybe because Jordan, jumped to Double-A, it pissed a lot of people off, and that was kind of their way to come about it.
You know what, though? You know what I caught, though? And I thought that, too. I remember even thinking that back when he was playing. Like, is it really fair for him to be playing Double-A? But the players seem to love him. So yeah. I don't think there was any issues there. Like you said, he bought them a nice bus. You see clips of him in the locker room genuinely looking like he's having fun with the guys in the locker room. I've even heard Jordan say, how great of an experience was for him and how good the guys were to him. And so I think if, like you said, if anyone had a problem with him sort of jumping levels, I think it was more people on the outside looking in than people directly involved, with the organization and with the Barons.
And Francona said that if he got 1,500 at bats, he thought he could be a major league player, which is pretty high praise from one of the top managers in the game.
And that means something coming. You're right. That means something coming from Terry Francona. Hey, are the Barons still in Birmingham? Is that still a team or?
Yeah. Barons have a big history, man. Barons go back. They were the Birmingham Black Barons for a while. Willie Mays played there. Some really good players there in the Negro Leagues, and then you got this era, and then now they got one of the nicest ballparks in the Southern League. So
nice.
You'll have to take you to a game sometime next time you're down there. But shout out to the Barons. I actually spent about a month working for the Barons before I went to ESPN. So
there you go.
Little tie for you, Mike. But I think also back to the Barons and like his relationship in the locker room. I also think that maybe because he wasn't the greatest in baseball, that he took a different approach to it. You know what I mean? Like, and he was not, and he had that experience and been worn out, and this kind of a fresh start. But I think also like he couldn't demand it from his teammates because he couldn't produce. You know what I mean? Like if he was hitting 330 and hitting bombs, he probably would have been an asshole to his teammates too. But because he didn't have that and wasn't at that level, maybe give him 2 or 3 years, he could have gotten there. You know, he was playing his part on the team rather than being that alpha dog.
Yeah, and to have that awareness, given how famous he was in the world at that time, having that self-awareness that, hey, I got to fit in and be one of the guys and earn my stripes, I think it says a lot about him. Yeah,
and you talk about if anybody was upset about him playing in Double-A, I can't imagine what his lifestyle change was from where he was playing the Dream Team a year ago, 3 straight World Championships. Now he's riding the bus, and all the requests he's getting nonstop, and all those southern towns that he's traveling to every night, Greenville and Jacksonville and all these different cities that he's visiting. He handled it really well. I'll say that. I think he did really well with the hand he was dealt and what he tried to accomplish. And, I think he can be proud of how that era went. But he obviously did not do this forever. He had a short stint playing basketball, and, we're going to get into that a little bit. But getting back to the Bulls, the other part of the story was what happens with Chicago afterwards. And, Mike, it was pretty interesting to see, and I kind of remember this era a little bit, but Scottie Pippen obviously rose to be the leader of this team. And he says things were great after Jordan was gone because we didn't have all that pressure. Teammates were getting along. We're having a good time in the locker room. But first sign of attrition for Pippen, and he backed down. And one of the biggest moments in this episode was that story of the playoff with them down or them tied. Was it tied or down? Either way, last shot, Phil Jackson draws up a play for Kukoc with great reason. We had run this before. It worked well. We executed. Kukoc made some shots, hit some big shots, and then he makes Pippen inbound the ball, and Pippen says, I'm not going out there. I thought, to me, that looked as bad on Pippen as anything we've seen.
Yeah, so that Bulls team that year, they had 3 All-Stars, Pippen, Horace Grant, and B.J. Armstrong. You had Kukoc's arrival, finally, after being drafted in 1990. It's his first season with the team. They went through in this documentary how Kukoc had hit big shots late in games throughout the season. Jackson draws the play up for Kukoc. Pippen decides not to go on the court, refuses to go on the court. Kukoc hits the shot to win the game against the Knicks. They end up losing in 7 games to the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals. But Kukoc hits the shot, which I think makes Pippen look even worse. And now you have another incident here where you have Pippen having disagreements with the coach in this case, and it impacting his relationship with the team. Because remember, a couple episodes ago, we were talking about how he missed up until January of the 98 season because he wasn't going to have, surgery F up his summer.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a part of his strife with the front office and not wanting to play for a front office that didn't want to give him a new contract. So this is the second incident here where you have Pippen just doesn't look good. And, this made him look even when this was going down in the moment, this made him look really bad. And it's one of those things where it's one of the first 2 or 3 things you think of when you think of Pippen.
Now it is. I mean, I didn't remember it before.
I think it's always, honestly, man, I don't know.
I'm saying now it is for me. Because I'm aware of it now. But yeah, I mean, it's a very, very poor look to just quit. I mean, essentially, and his whole team said it. You quit on your team, and your boy Bill Cartwright got emotional afterwards.
Yeah, and you see how we'll get to Bill in a second, but you have. They even mentioned it in a documentary after that game where he sort of let his teammates down. They had the emotional locker room meeting. Pippen played very well the rest of the series, but no one remembers that. Ask anyone what they remember from that series, and they're going to tell you, something that happened early in the series when he didn't go back in the game. They're not even going to remember that he had a good series and that without Jordan, they pushed the Knicks to 7 games. Bill Cartwright crying in the locker room afterwards. I mean, whatever that was. But you know what? It did get an emotional reaction out of Pippen and did sort of elevate his play for the rest of the series. So maybe it was worth it. But it's just one of those things where, I don't know. Pippen's a unique guy, you know?
Yeah.
The more you watch this, the more Jordan meant a lot to Pippen, but Pippen meant a lot to Jordan, but Jordan meant a lot to Pippen as well, I think is my takeaway. Because you even had Jordan calling Phil Jackson the day after this happened and telling Phil Jackson, you know, Scotty's never going to live this down.
Yeah. It was a crazy, crazy night and a big, big deal for that team and organization. But, you know, seemingly they got over it. And, you know, Pippen was obviously with that team for 4 or 5 more years. But in the moment, yeah, bad look. And the fact that Kukoc drilled that, I mean, how cold-blooded was that to knock that down? He misses that shot, it may be a different story. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but he drills that, and all of a sudden, I mean, I can't imagine what Pippen's thought was. But for Phil to just be like, F him, let's go, I respected that. I mean, I respect the fact that you brush that off and you play with what you dealt, and that's what he was able to do.
Phil Jackson, when he played, was a tough, rugged player. People forget about that because they think about all the Zen Buddhism stuff and all that stuff that he does now. But Phil Jackson had a fiery side to him as well, and it definitely came out in that huddle, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So they wrap up losing in, as you mentioned, losing in 7 to the Knicks, and we kind of tie it back into 98. Going back, we had the first round series against the Nets, and we kind of start getting a taste of Jordan and his teammates, and we get a really close look at how he reacts and how he interacts with Scott Burrell on that Bulls team. I think Burrell was only a teammate for 1 year maybe, but we start getting a sense of that. And dude, he rode that guy, and I respect. I mean, Burrell just kind of ignored him. I mean, he didn't back down necessarily, but he didn't react to it. He just kind of let it be. But Jordan was all over him, and I love Jordan's use of the word "hoe." Like that's like his.
I know, man. Oh, man. When they said they were going to have a cut of this with a lot of, you know, curse words in it, I didn't think the curse word he'd say the most was going to be hoe.
Hit this free.
He said it 2 or 3 times within 5 minutes of the documentary.
It was so 90s. Like that was like, you don't hear that near as much now, but I mean, it was thrown around a lot in the 90s, right? I think it's just a part of that era.
It was subtle too.
Yeah.
It was a quick hoe. Like it wasn't like it drawn out. It was funny.
But Scotty Burrell, it was great. I mean, I enjoyed seeing it, and you know, we ended up finding out that he has a really good game in the playoffs in '98. So he kind of lives up to it. But it kind of gives you that look at how Jordan demanded his players and his teammates step up and improve their game.
And they also all of them that were interviewed in this piece here. I mean, I remember Will Perdue and Bill Wennington, but they all didn't like it in the moment. But they look back and say how much it motivated them. Every single player. I mean, Judd Bushel even said it word for word. People were afraid of Jordan, but they all come back around and say, "Hey, look, it got us to where we needed to be."
It's no surprise when we all of us that ever played sports look back and say that coach that was the hardest to play for ended up getting the most out of you, and you remembered that guy more than anything. It's the same type of thing, and this takes us to the end of the episode where, you know, one of the most powerful, you know, couple of minutes in this whole series, where Jordan's talking about that and talking about how I only asked my teammates to do what I was doing. Never once would they ever hear me ask them to do something that I hadn't already done or doing with them as well. And they show the clip of him running up and down, leading his team in the suicides back and forth across the court in practice. And he's talking about it. And he says, look, you know, if you felt like, and this is kind of, I think, what we thought everybody would think about the series we heard beforehand. Everybody's going to think Jordan's just really a bad person. You're going to take your big takeaway is going to be, I don't like Jordan. This is all said and done. And I think it's kind of the pinnacle of that moment where Jordan, it all kind of comes together and they're setting up the next episode. But Jordan says, look, if you felt that way, it's because you weren't winning. And this is the only thing that he knows. And he finishes by breaking down at the end, talking about that. And I think he kind of has this run up and this maybe coming to the idea that, you know, this is who I am. You know, I can't do anything differently. This is how I compete. This is how I play. This is how I attempt to lead players. I mean, I'm not gonna be anything else but who I am, whether you like it or not. This is just who I am and who I'm gonna be forever. I know nothing different than that. And I thought that was just a really emotional, powerful. But I just thought, to me, And maybe it's because we're still a little bit more old school, I guess, now, Mike. I mean, I never would have considered us old school before, but you think back on this era pre like social media and this, this era of everybody getting offended by the smallest thing, right? I mean, you have to be offended about something. That I didn't find any problem with the way that he acted. I mean, to get to that level, to be the best there ever was, you have to sacrifice things. And his sacrifice was, right, getting along with everybody and maybe not having as many friends as the next guy did. But what happened because of it? He was able to win just about every championship that he could once he got to that level. And his teammates in the end, I'm sure are all grateful for that. But, that's going to be the big takeaway is how do you feel about Jordan and the way that he went about it?
Yeah, I don't know if it was, like you said, I don't know if it was from when we were growing up, but it's sort of, I remember being around guys like Jordan was, like kind of like dickhead kind of guys. You know what I mean? He wasn't like demeaning, like screaming at guys and like picking fights with them. You know what I mean? Like he was just kind of like being a little jerky to him, razzing him a lot.
Not yet, at least.
We get into it later. I know we got into some scuffles with teammates, but that's pretty much what it was him just staying on top of guys and making sure they didn't settle and doing it in kind of like a little jerky kind of way, which again, I don't think was that uncommon back then. And I think he even said in some interviews before the documentary, he was nervous about, or not nervous, but he thought that people might think of him differently after this documentary. And unless there's something crazy coming up in these last two episodes, I don't think any differently of him than I did beforehand. And, that last 2 minutes of that episode was pretty powerful, man. And if you're an emotional guy or girl, this episode was not for you because you had the stuff with his father. And then you had the ending here where he pretty much said, look, I don't have to do or include any of this in this documentary, but he's honest. He said, look, this is how I am. And this is how I was. And, he basically doesn't apologize for it. And it got him emotional towards the end. And I thought that was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I did too. And it sets us up for our next episode, episode 8, in which we have Jordan go back to the Bulls and really that relationship with teammates really rises up because he goes back and it's almost all new guys that he's playing with. So we're going to get into that episode next here on Distant Replay Podcast, but let's wrap this one up. Mike, any final thoughts, anything else that you want to hit before we get out of here?
No, I thought this was a very good episode. And again, it sets the scene for when he eventually comes back to the NBA, which is awesome, which we'll get to in the next episode.
Well, thanks for listening to this episode of Distant Replay Podcast. You can find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com, on Twitter, Distant Podcast, and also on YouTube as well. Every episode is archived on our website. But please hit subscribe too, if you can, and leave us a review. We would really appreciate that. So stay tuned for episode 8. That's what we'll talk about on the next episode of Distant Replay Podcast.